Today, we're taking a look at the Avro 549 Aldershot. This was Avro's first entirely new post-war military aircraft, and it was built as a long-range, single-engine heavy bomber. Following the end of the First World War, the idea of single-engine bombers had become quite popular with the British Air Ministry. It was a time of economic strife, and they were looking for ways to maintain a strong bomber force that wouldn't cost a small fortune to produce and maintain. The easiest solution to this was to reduce the number of engines, and with the advent of newer power plants, this was now possible. Because of this, the Air Ministry issued Specification 2/20, which called for a large, single-engine bomber with a range of 500 miles or 804 kilometers and a bomb load of 2,000 pounds, which is about 900 kilos. To meet this specification, Avro designer Roy Chadwick drew up plans for what would become the Aldershot. Powered by a single 650 horsepower Rolls-Royce Condor 3, the Aldershot was notable as being the first Avro aircraft to feature a metal fuselage structure. The rear of this fuselage was clad in doped fabric, and the front section was covered in plywood. It was deep enough that it accommodated a double-deck cabin, a 210-gallon fuel tank was located ahead of the cabin, and the lower half of the nose formed a radiator compartment into which cooling air was admitted through controllable shutters. It had 3-bay, slightly swept-back folding wings. They were of wooden construction and fitted with large differential ailerons, and were aerodynamically balanced by park bench aerofoils on the upper set. For a single-engine aircraft, the accommodation for the crew was considered especially spacious. 2 pilots sat side by side on the upper deck with a dual-control cockpit. Behind them, in his own cockpit, was the rear gunner, who had a scarf-mounted Lewis gun, and below them, via a small access ladder, was the cabin that housed the bomb aimer and radio operator. For some reason, sources seem to conflict on the crew complement. Some claim it to be as little as 3. In fact, Wikipedia even claims this number. But after reviewing several documents and looking at the layout of the Aldershot, I believe the total number was 5. 2 pilots, a gunner, the radio operator, and the bomb aimer. In a pinch, it could be operated by 4, with the gunner also operating the radio, but I can't say for certain if this was ever done in practice. For combat operations, the Aldershot was built to be moderately defended and to carry a large payload. A high-set variable incidence tailplane gave the gunner a clear field of fire over and around the tail surfaces. The aircraft also came with a forward-firing machine gun, though, like many others of this time, its underside was completely vulnerable. This underside held a very wide track undercarriage, which was divided so that a single heavy bomb could be carried beneath the fuselage. At the beginning, this was the World War I era 1,800-pound SN high-explosive bomb, though this arrangement would change later. As a quick side note on the armament, later on there appears to have been provision made for a ventral machine gun, but how often this was actually used is difficult to tell. There are drawings that show it, though I've struggled to find any photo evidence of the gun being installed, so I'm just going to leave it as a tentative maybe. The Aldershot came in 3 distinct forms, the Aldershot 1, 2, and 3, though only the latter represented actual production models, with the first iterations being prototypes. 2 prototype Mark Is were built as the original entrants for the Air Ministry's proposal, competing directly with the de Havilland Derby. The first of these flew for the first time in October of 1921, with test pilot Bert Hinkler at the controls. Early flights revealed that the rudder was excessively heavy, resulting in minimal lateral control, and this made takeoff and landing a little bit nerve-wracking for Hinkler. To address this, the dorsal fin was removed, and a new rudder was installed with a large balancer, but this only partially solved the problem. The solution ended up being the extension of the fuselage itself by about 6 feet, which necessitated a return to the workshop and a protracted delay in flight testing. But it worked, and Hinkler reported that the aircraft was far more stable during takeoff and in flight, and the rudder now felt far more effective. The Aldershot then made its public debut at the 1922 RAF display at Hendon. For a single-engine aircraft, it was deeply impressive, but its size hid the fact that it was also fairly quick and maneuverable for an aircraft of its bulk. By today's standards, a top speed barely in excess of 100 miles an hour or 160 kilometers an hour may seem slow, but for a single-engine biplane in 1922, and one that weighed 4.5 tons when loaded, it was an impressive performer. This was then confirmed when it won the handicap race held during the air display itself, which even surprised the Aldershot's designer. Following Hendon, the first prototype Aldershot went back to the workshop for a major upgrade. Almost nothing is known about the fate of the second. It received one of the 6 experimental Napier Cub engines. This was a 60-litre, 16-cylinder engine weighing over a ton that produced 1,000 horsepower. Only 6 of these massive power plants were built, and the only other aircraft to make use of it was the Blackburn Cubberoo, which we've already covered on this channel. This vast power plant drove a large 4-blade propeller, and it was so impressive that it required a redesign of the engine mounts, the reinforcement of almost the entire airframe, and the installation of a double undercarriage. Owing to the drastic design changes, the aircraft was redesignated as the Aldershot Mark II. It flew for the first time amid considerable publicity and in the presence of the Vice Air Marshal and Avro himself on the 5th of December 1922. Considering it had almost 2 tons added to its weight by the engine and various reinforcements, the Aldershot performed remarkably well. It took off from the field at Hamble after a mere 3 seconds, and after getting a feel for the controls, Hinkler threw it about with considerable enthusiasm. During his little display, he supposedly achieved 140 miles an hour in a downward pass over the spectators, after which he came down for a smooth landing at a speed that seemed impossibly slow for the aircraft to handle safely. Hinkler was suitably impressed by its performance, and said that its stability during flight made it remarkably forgiving, even with the roughest of control inputs. After its first flights at Hamble, the Aldershot II went to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough in January 1923. It spent the first half of the year completing various flights, tests and experiments, some concerning the aircraft, some more specific to its engine. After attending the Hendon display that year, it was then shipped off to Sweden for the Gothenburg Aero exhibition, where it dwarfed all other aircraft on display there. After this, it spent the next few years either as a research aircraft or as an attraction at public displays. The rest of 1923 was spent at the RAE engine research flight, where more data was gathered on the performance of the Napier Cub, and after this it was used for a long series of experimental trials. 4 years later, in 1927, it was re-engined with the Beardmore Typhoon, which was even more experimental than the Napier Cub. This was a huge 6-cylinder engine that displaced 68 litres, and was designed to provide high power at low revolutions, to the tune of 850 to 950 horsepower. Equipped with this new engine, the aircraft was known as the Avro 549C, or the Aldershot Mark IV, and it was flown experimentally from the 10th of January 1927 until it was finally retired and scrapped, the date of which is unknown. Unlike many experimental aircraft from this period, the Aldershot was lucky enough to be put into production as well, albeit on a limited basis. Back in 1923, the Aldershot had been impressive enough for the Air Ministry to place an initial production order for 15 aircraft. Unfortunately, the Napier Cub proved to be a short-lived experiment, and these new Aldershots were to be powered by the same Rolls-Royce Condor 3 as the original design proposal. Though much of the design was similar to the original Aldershot, there were some changes made to bring it up to standard for the RAF. To cope with rough takeoff and landings, the Aldershot received a multi-strut reinforced undercarriage. The bomb load was now to be carried internally, normally comprising of 12 200-pound bombs, or, in place of this, 2 torpedoes could be suspended below the fuselage between the landing wheels. And, as the weight had crept up, additional fuel tanks were added to the upper wing to increase its range. The armament remained the same, as was the crew complement of 5, and there seems to be some indication of upgraded equipment within the main cabin as well, though I've struggled to confirm this. Completed as the Aldershot Mark III, these aircraft entered service with No. 99 Squadron on April 1, 1924. The Aldershot's exceptional stability made them well suited to nighttime operations, and in consequence of this, many of 99 Squadron's operations were done at night. This was fairly uncommon for an aircraft of this size, as this sort of flying was still considered highly risky at the time, but the Aldershots excelled in their role, and they quickly earned a good reputation with their crews. Unfortunately, the Aldershot was a victim of its own design. In 1925, the Air Ministry abandoned its policy of producing large, single-engine bombers in favour of multi-engine designs once again. This was for multiple reasons: safety, reliability, range, power, higher payload, but it all amounted to the same thing: the Aldershot was doomed. They only served with 99 Squadron for 2 short years, all of which were peaceful, and the aircraft never really got to display its qualities, with the exception of a few mock bombing runs done during various training exercises. One of the Aldershot's last major outings was to fly at the Hendon Air Show in 1925, where the entire squadron flew in formation, which would have been an amazing sight, but it was also the last time that they would do so. In January 1926, the squadron refitted with Handley Page Hyderabad's, and the Aldershot's short career came to an end. Not much is known about what happened after this, but seeing as nothing of them survives today, it's safe to assume they were scrapped at some point in the mid-1920s. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you, of course, to the patrons. This video was not actually meant to go up today, it was meant to go up next week, but today's planned video got delayed, so these are now going up out of order, so you'll get some more updates on the channel in the next video. A big thank you, as always, goes out to the Wing Commander tier patrons, our highest tier members. I'll be uploading some Patreon-exclusive updates in the very near future, so stay tuned for that. But thank you all so much for your continued support, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.